Simon from simonwoods.com. Welcome to Wine FAQ. A small topic today. How does climate affect the flavours of a wine? Golly, that's a big one. There are entire books written about it. I don't know how I'm going to manage to cover it in a rather short video, but we'll give it a go. Grapes. It starts with grapes. Wine starts with grapes. It's made from grapes after all. And grapes need a few things, or grapevine needs a few things to grow. Three basics really. One of them is it needs enough water. Second, it needs enough sunlight. And the third is it needs enough heat. Traditionally, the places in the world where all these three fall into balance have been between 30 and 50 degrees north and south of the equator. There's like these little bands. You can grow grapes in other parts of the world, and certainly closer to the equator and even further closer to the poles, but it's a bit more difficult. Maybe we'll save that for another video, because that's you can do entire. I could probably do entire lectures on those and bore you senseless, but I'm not going to bore you senseless. Anyway, those three elements. First of all, water. Yeah, if you don't have water, the vines go and cark-it. Traditionally in Europe, the water has come from the skies, and so the rain has in these places it tends to fall most of it in winter, but then there'll be awkward bits through the rest of the a grape growing season starts spring, finishes autumn basically, so you want most of your rain to fall in winter and maybe a few spring and early summer showers, but you ideally you don't want too much rain from middle of the season onwards, so summer onwards, so the grapes can sit there and they get enough water from the reserves that have fallen, the rain that's fallen in the winter and earlier in the year, and they can draw the water up there from there when they need a drink. Now you can tinker with nature by irrigating, and there's some parts of the world, things like Chile and Argentina, where there's hardly any rainfall in the place where they make wine, but there's this big hill called the Andes in between the two, and so you get all the snow on the top melts, rivers go down either side, and you can tap into the water from those, and so there's enough water there for the grapes to grow. There are some places where there is too much water. I mean, England, for example, apart from the fact that there's not enough sunlight, we'll get onto that in a moment, there are some places, if you do get too much rain, depends on your soil. If your soil is really heavy and clay-like, the rain sort of soaks into it and sits there, and the vine roots get a bit waterlogged, which you don't mind the water hanging around in places where it's actually warmer and doesn't rain as much. A bit of a shower on those clayey soils doesn't really matter, because the vines might actually think, oh, this is a welcome drink. But if it goes on and on and on, it just means that the vines are more in danger of getting a bit too humid. And when you get humidity on a grapevine, you start getting fungal diseases, and you don't want them. Next one, heat. You want something. You want a place that is sufficiently. Vines need a little bit of heat to get them going. So, for example, if you're growing grapes close to the North Pole, you've probably got loads and loads of sunlight, and you've probably got no shortage of water. But there's just not enough heat for the vine to get to a stage where it can think, right, okay, it's spring. Is it warm enough to start growing yet? Oh no, I'll wait a few weeks. And a vine needs to get to a certain temperature before it will start growing. And if it needs to be early in spring, because if it gets to being later in spring, it needs a certain amount of weeks, months for the vine growth cycle to complete. And if it starts too late, then by the time it's finished, you're in winter, and the grapes never finish their ripening. At the opposite extremes, yes, you can grow grapes in places that are really, 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 really hot. I mean, you look at some places in the Riverland in Australia, Central Valley in California, bits of Chile, Argentina, bits of southern Spain, and there's a lot of heat here, and certainly some of the more delicate grape varieties, some of the ones that rely on their aromas for their pleasure, they don't grow particularly well there, because if it gets too hot, some of those aromas just turn a bit muddy. But if you've got grapes that are adapted to extra heat, well, then they can grow pretty well there. So there are some grapes. There's one called Mourvedre, or Monastrell as it is in Spain, or Mataro as they know it in Australia. That really only grows where it's pretty hot. You take it further north, and it just doesn't ripen at all. Other things, well, Petit Verdot, Cabernet Sauvignon really needs a bit of heat to ripen it. So does Syrah. But yeah, I mean, you look at the grapes that grow well in southern Italy as well. Primitivo, which is the same as Zinfandel in California. Some grapes are better adapted to the heat. So you need heat, and you can have too much heat for certain grape varieties, but others are better adapted to that heat. But you certainly need enough heat for the vine cycle to start early enough. Final one, sunlight. You need sunlight on the leaves in order for the vines to photosynthesize. What you don't want is you don't want so much that the actual grapes themselves get sunburnt. It's important that sunlight hits the grapes, because that is one of the things that, especially with red wines, with red grapes, you need that heat on the grapes, that sunlight on the grapes, in order for them to mature, the flavours and the tannins and various colouring compounds in the grape skins. You need that, but you don't want so much sunlight that grapes are sensitive little flowers, and like us, they get sunburned. So you want enough area of leaves in order for there to be photosynthesis, and also to shade the fruit. If you have too many leaves, however, you don't get the sun through. So it's a balancing act. They call it canopy management. Again, entire books are written on that. So back to those three elements. As long as there's enough water, as long as there's enough sunlight, and as long as there's enough heat, you will get your grapes will ripen. How does it affect the flavours? Well, water first. If you put too much water into, if there's too much water, what ends up happening is the grapes swell up like this, and you get a dilute wine. So say a grape can give a certain amount of flavour, then if it's a small grape, then you've got a small amount of intensely flavoured juice. If it's a big grape, you get more juice, equals more wine, but it doesn't taste of as much. If you haven't got enough water, what often happens is the vine just says, I can't cope, and there's this thing called heat stress. So heat stress, as long as there's enough water, it can keep going. It's a bit like people in the desert. If you've got enough water and enough shade, you can keep going. But if you lack either, then you sort of start withering. And what happens is the grape shuts down, and the skin of the grape will still be getting sun on it, but it'll start to shrivel up, and so you'll get this weird mix of something that tastes a bit like a raisin, but it's also got this green underripe flavour. You don't want that. So that's a bit of the water and the sunlight thing. And the heat thing, yeah, I mean, if you can shade your grapes, if you can give them enough of a drink, they'll cope. But generally, wines from warmer climates will have sweeter, rounder, higher sugar level, which then translates into higher alcohol. And wines from cooler, generally wetter, because that's what tends to be happening. The cooler ones tend to be that little bit wetter. Then there'll be more acidity in the grapes. So that you get a fresher flavour. For one person's freshness is another one's buttock clenching acidity. But hey, is that it? It's probably not it. If I've missed anything out, if any of that's confusing, drop me a line and we'll see what we can do. See you soon.